Order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Jim Anderton.
Mr. Speaker, this question was originally set down for the Prime Minister to ask him about his specific commitment to achieve an economic step change for New Zealand. I'm not sure that it's fair or relevant to ask that of the Minister of Finance. I don't know that he made such a commitment.
Well, it is the government's responsibility who answers questions with respect to their responsibility. The question is about New Zealand's economic performance and does seem not unreasonable that it's been directed to the Minister of Finance. The Honourable Jim Anderton.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Finance then, when the Prime Minister promised a step change in economic performance, did the Minister of Finance believe that the step change would be brought about?
That's not what the question in front of me actually says.
Mr. Speaker, the original question was to the Prime Minister and asking him about his promise.
The member, with respect, the member's been in this place just as long as I have and knows that the final wording of questions is what is agreed with the clerk's office, that some questions do require rewording, and I'd ask the member to ask the question as worded.
Mr. Speaker, was it his objective, this is to the Minister of Finance, for the national-led government to deliver a step change in New Zealand's economic performance, and if so, has such a step change been achieved?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes, it is our objective. Although incoming national governments always find they have to achieve this, in 1975 and 1990, incoming governments inherited from Labor economies that were headed for a recession with bad budget positions. In hindsight, I wonder why we didn't expect this in 2008. We got it, and we're trying to look performance.
Now, as I read this question, it doesn't... the question simply asks, was it his objective for the national-led government to deliver a step change in New Zealand's economic performance? If so, has such a step change been achieved? Now, to launch into an attack on some other parties, I mean, there's nothing wrong with referring to past record, but the substance of the answer, this is a question on notice, should relate to whether the Minister considers, and there's no fixed answer to it, whether a step change has been achieved. And the other matter may be relevant, shouldn't be the prime part of a question to dump on the questioner's parties. The Honourable Bill English.
Yes, it is our objective, and in response to the member's question of whether a step change has been achieved, incoming national governments have achieved a step change in growth, both in 1975 and 1990, and we probably should have expected that it would be required in 2008.
Order. The Minister has totally ignored the Speaker. Now, we're getting close to Christmas, and I don't want to deal in too severe a way with any members, but I just asked the member to treat the questioner with some respect. As I understand it, the Minister has acknowledged that a step change in New Zealand's economic performance was an objective, and whether or not the government has achieved it ought to be something that's not that difficult for the Minister to say, without going back and giving the House a history lesson on as he was, I believe is not reasonable and fair given that question asked. And I'd ask the Minister to listen to what the Speaker is saying on this, because members have a right to ask reasonable questions, and this is not an unreasonable question. The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes, and this government inherited an economy contracting. It was shrinking, and in fact the export sector started shrinking in 2005. And since then, we have turned it around considerably, but there is a long way to go.
The Honourable Jim Anderton.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister of Finance believe that the step change has been brought about by giving $14 billion in tax cuts to New Zealanders earning over $100,000, so that the last government's fiscal surpluses would change to the massive deficits revealed today?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, the member is showing that he does not understand the legacy left by the previous government, which was, in the 2008 budget, a forecast of 10 years of deficits. The tax packages that this government has produced since 2009 have been fiscally neutral. That is, income tax cuts have been paid for by increases in taxes or reductions in expenditure elsewhere. So the member is simply wrong.
The Honourable Jim
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Mr Speaker, has the Minister of Finance seen figures released today showing that retail sales slumped by 2.5% after the GST increase to 15% in October, to go with rising prices, falling real wages and higher unemployment? And if so, how are those outcomes a sign of the economic step change that the Prime Minister promised?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the flat consumption, I'd agree, is in sharp contrast to the record of the previous government, where from about 2004 onwards the export sector was driven into the ground and New Zealanders went on a debt-funded spending binge. We make no apology for the fact that our policies are designed to turn that around by encouraging savings in exports, and the increase in GST and increase in effective tax rate on housing will help us to avoid the same kind of binge again.
The Honourable Jim Anderton.
Mr Speaker, did the Minister note that GDP in constant dollars rose by 1.2% from December 2008 to June 2010, compared to the 3.4% in the corresponding first 18 months in office of the last government? And if so, is that again an example of the step change that the Prime Minister promised?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, apart from the global financial crisis which intervened, and the damage done, including by that member, to our export sector, I do accept that the first few years of growth under this government have not been as high as we would like them to be. However, we're putting in place the platform to turn around the damage done by the previous government, to overcome the effects of the global financial crisis and to strengthen our economy.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. In refusing to take responsibility for the economic position that he's had 2 years to influence and to blame the previous government, why then did he describe on the 18th of December 2008 the economic position of this country as he inherited it from Labor as reasonable? And why did his Treasury officials state in their briefing to him that Labor had, quote, done a good job of getting the New Zealand economy in a position where it can respond well to economic shocks? Why doesn't he take responsibility for his own actions?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, in December 2008 that advice was wrong. The government's books. The government's net debt position was relatively sound, but government spending was completely out of control. The export sector had been driven into the ground. There was a loss of confidence in investment. Debt was going through the roof, and it's taken us all of the last 2 years to turn around the damage done by the Labor Party to New Zealand's economy.
Question number 6, Gareth Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.